Greetings, this is Eugene the Philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert de Nameland, who has been the greatest living philosopher before me. Today I wish to talk to you about a phenomenon that is quite, I would say, prominent in culture, not only the modern culture. I would say it kind of existed all the time, probably, but today it's more or less perhaps more prevalent than previously, okay? And in order to describe this phenomenon, I would like to tell you a story, like somewhat of a personal story maybe, to maybe better describe my motivation and why I started thinking about this in the first place, okay? And then I'll try to generalize this and show you that it's actually a very understandable phenomenon, and it probably has its justifiable place in our culture, okay? So the story is about what is called "Что, где, когда" in Russian, which means what, where, when. It's like 3 questions. It's like a TV show, like an intellectual game, if you like, that is pretty popular today, and it was very popular in like late Soviet Union, like since 1970s. So it's a intellectual TV show, if you like. But I wouldn't even talk about the show itself, but the sport version of the same game, which is still played like all over the world, but mostly, or maybe even only, in Russian-speaking countries, like communities, right? So this sport version of this game involves basically, the game is that you are asked a question, like a few sentences usually, and you have a minute to answer it, right? And you have to like name a person, name a, I don't know, a book or whatever, an event, a place, something like that usually. And it's encoded in the question, and there is a like pretty standardized patterns of how you should compose these questions. So you should like hide in the question with certain like metaphors or allusions or whatever clues, right, to the answer, because sometimes there are many answers are possible, so you have to encode in the question like perhaps the phrasing, the wording itself, how you can cut off the other versions and only leave the correct one, right, etc., etc. So while I was playing this thing myself, the sport version of this game, like when I was late high school, let's say, maybe like 17 years old, and further, like maybe early years at the university. So I became like very, very pissed off and baffled at how like vulgar it is, if you know what I mean. So I'll try to explain. So in all these questions, and like the very mechanics of this game sort of assumes that like all the events, all the people, all the phenomena in culture, all the ideas, theories, etc., they're sort of basically they are compressed into these sort of super simplified, shallow versions of themselves, right? Because again, you need to get a hint on them through some, you know, association. Like I don't know, Phrygian hat would be associated with French Revolution, right? Or something to that effect. Or Phrygian mode in music or whatever, but that would be a very complex question probably. So hopefully you see where I'm going. So it basically turns all these phenomena, all these items of culture into a very, very like simplified versions of themselves, and it pisses me off, honestly. Like it's so 2-dimensional, you know, in terms of all the 3-dimensional depth of culture, that it's just unworthy, you know, of any intellectual, like actual smart person to participate in such a game, you know. So it's always, I've always had a very, very disgusting feeling after playing it, you know, because of that, because of this vulgarity, I guess, shallowness, this pathetic trivialization of everything in this game. So this is my personal motivation, you know, to think about those things. well, I should add, especially if you are familiar with phenomena that we're talking about in these questions, etc. Okay, but it hints onto a broader issue, of course, of public perception of things, which is inherently, I would say, very simplified and two-dimensional, and like probably. So it's I mean, it's actually, the sentiment itself is very vulgar, right? That the public is stupid. It's also a very stupid statement, but nevertheless. So that was the story. Now let's try to generalize it and see if such an approach may be justified. And indeed, I would say it is. And it is a global pattern in culture. You might say sort of like a collective subconscious, right, or mind palace of culture, where we tend to like store things. Like culture is very broad, right? There's tons of things that we cannot have possibly knowledge about all of them, right? So we need to simplify it to navigate it. And so we try to narrow things down to absolute bare minimum and put them on shelves, so to speak. So that's why I'll probably name this video like Library World or something like that, because that's the only decent analogy I can think of. It's the library, right? So in a library, even on a single bookshelf, you might have like I don't know, thousands of hours of reading, right? Whereas like you can only observe like the book edges, I don't know how you call it, whatever, immediately, right? So you don't know what's in those books. You can only see like the cover itself, right? Only a part of the cover, actually. So this is roughly how culture works in general. We tend to like pressurize, archive things to make them observable, at least like the multitude of them observable. Whereas if you want to make yourself familiar with any of them, you have to approach it like, actually take the book, open it, and spend like, again, dozens, if not hundreds of hours reading it. Then you may say, okay, I've got a very good idea what this book actually contains. But it's your personal journey in some sense. The culture itself as again, this sort of vague collective spirit of humanity doesn't need that depth of knowledge about anything, because again, as long as it's accessible through it, it's okay. So the culture works as this library where it only shows you through this collective subconscious or whatever. I'm not again using this in any sort of mystical sense. I'm just kind of a practical approximation of what's happening. So something like that occurs, right? You have some vague understanding of some things you are not familiar with through some secondary means that culture provides for you. But if you want, you may familiarize yourself with them by, again, approaching them and spending time with them and effort in understanding them. Okay, so this is the idea. And again, it's a global pattern, I believe, and as you might see, it's understandable why we do this, why the culture works this way, because again, simplification is needed for better scaling, among other things, like even not only talking about like ideas or theories, even human beings. A human being cannot be replicated, right? But a model of a human being can be replicated. So some simplified version of a human being, let's say like a statue of a person, of course it's just a very simplified version of this person, right? It doesn't move, it's doesn't have like all the infinite complexity of the physical makeup of the actual human being. Like it doesn't have all the cells, and all the cellular biology in it, and it doesn't, breathe, etc., and evolve, blah blah blah. But it's still a model, right? And it can be replicated. The same goes for photo or any sort of other recording. Like you can make infinite amount of copies of that, whereas you cannot really copy a human being. At least at this moment we cannot. Right? And same goes for, so it allows you to scale it, right? So it of course has like a backside, if that's even a word. A downside, I guess, would be a better way to put it. So when a person becomes a subject of this cultural manipulation, when a person starts being scaled, I guess, up, copied, basically, the person basically is no longer exists in some sense. Like the person becomes a hero, not a real person, you know. It's no longer a Tolstoy or Gandhi. It's I mean, themselves like human beings, but it's symbols almost, right? So they are not living people anymore. So they become almost fictional characters. Again, whatever, any sort of person. So when we're talking about famous people, we actually there is no difference between famous people, any sort of famous people, famous for any reasons. There's no difference between them and fictional characters, like literally. They're not real people as far as they are famous, right? I mean, you may meet the famous person and like interact with them as a person, but this other aspect of them, which is the fame, the person that exists in culture rather than in front of you, is actually a fictional character, right? To some degree, it may be generalized on all people. I mean, you, in the perception of others, are also a fictional character to some degree. So yeah, but we're talking about like much larger scale when we're talking about the famous people and culture itself, right? Okay, so and I guess that would be one of the reasons why, let's say, dead artists sell better, right? Because, well, a dead artist cannot object, you know, for whatever manipulations they are being subjected to, I guess. So you can basically pretend that this dead artist wanted to say whatever you want them to say, right? So whatever, you make them a mouthpiece for whatever you're trying to say, basically. And they cannot object because they're dead, right? That's, well, one reason. Another reason is perhaps because, well, since they're dead, they won't make any new art. Therefore, there may be like a shortage of their art, so it would rise in value in some sense, right? And there may perhaps be other reasons, some of them like mystical in some sense, right? Like a dead person is like more interesting to us because, well, we can observe living people every day, but we cannot really talk to dead people. So if we can at least like touch them through their art, if you know what I mean, then, well, but whatever. This is of course, a huge off topic. Okay, so real people have different traits, right? But these fictional people that became manipulated by culture, they are only noticed by some of their hyperbolized traits, right? So they become symbols, almost fictional characters. That's what I'm talking about. And same goes for objects, really, objects and theories. Like think about symbols, like icons, like iconic symbolic depictions of some actions or things, like when you drive on a highway and you see, well, I'm not sure, in different countries it looks differently, but in my country I think it's like a fork with a knife, and it means like food, right? So there you can eat somewhere nearby. So if you like exit from the highway here or something like that, so this fork and a knife, and it's not a real fork, obviously, it's just a black silhouette of a fork, right? So it became a symbol of food, and well, you see where I'm going with this, right? It's not a real fork, it's just a symbol, and it's just its relation with the food that we kind of learned and have experience of, that allows us to conclude that from this vague silhouette of a fork, basically it's trying to tell us that there is some food nearby, which is, it's kind of a pretty complex, chain of associations, if you ask me, but, well, that's how culture operates, right? There you go. So this is pretty much what I'm talking about when we're talking about library world. Yeah, so what I was talking about is that obviously real objects are much more complex than their symbolic / archived hyperbolized depictions in culture is or are. That's what I wanted to say, and same goes for people, just as I've mentioned previously. Okay, so these things that I talked about, this standardization, I guess, it's of course was very important for mass production, and most likely this process of librarization of culture, if you like, it probably accelerated hugely during Industrial Revolution, because that was the time when standardization mattered the most, when clocks appeared, etc. You had to standardize time itself and things like that, and so you need to mass produce stuff, so you needed to fit everything to, to be able to scale things, right? So obviously standardization and the mass production that follows from it brings forth the increase in power, right? So let's say Elvis cannot have as much power singing in front of 100 people as he can recording his singing in front of like a few sound engineers, and then they can scale this recording for like 1 million of copies, and then 1 million of people can listen to it like several times a day, right? So that's a whole different ballpark, like a whole different game already. So this is what I'm talking about essentially. So, and we're not already talking about Elvis like sitting right here and singing, but we're talking about the fictional character of Elvis, right? Singing through this copied recording. So this is what I'm talking about. And this fictional character of Elvis is the character of these games, like What, Where, and When, that I mentioned at the very beginning. He's not a real person anymore. Okay, so, but he has much more power than the real, like just a regular person that's in front of us. And this process of industrialization, standardization, etc., it occurred in many other, let's say, branches of culture, and like seemingly unconnected things may be actually connected to that, I believe, like exploration of the world itself, like 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century, when people sailed to, well, various places. Like it brought forth, like it removed uncertainty, like it removed all these dragons, at the edges of our map. So the world became standardized, if you know what I mean. The world became known, right? And therefore, like you can operate in it, right? You can orient in it when it is known, and you can use it to your own benefit in some sense. And of course, the spreading of the British lifestyle across the British empire also helped a lot. So it standardized the way of life of people in industrialized societies, at least. And so it standardized, well, a lot of cultural practices as well with that. And, well, to a large degree, our lifestyle, like, well, at the very least before the pandemic, was still a copy of this British lifestyle, British colonial lifestyle of, like, middle of the 19th century. Of course, with certain modifications, but more or less it was still the same, right? Okay, and even things like pavement on the streets, like in one of my previous videos, like again, it made like our environment, meaning our streets, sort of known, reliable, you know, standardized. So you can no longer fear that you shouldn't, like, you don't have a necessity of looking like where you're going, like, I mean, underneath your feet, because you're not afraid that you're gonna step into some puddle. Well, even though, I mean, in some places it's slightly worse than others, or the ground would just, you know, collapse under you and you'll fall down like a dozen meters and die. Like, you shouldn't be afraid of that, and you just walk around like everything's cool. In one of my previous videos, I don't remember which one, I mentioned this story about the heel, right? How the invention of a heel in like 17th century roughly, well, not so much of an invention, but like popularization, if you like, it changed the way people walked, right? So previously people walked differently, because again the ground was uncertain, unknown, unstandardized, so to speak. But now that we have pavements and now that we have heels, like, both sides of the equation are reliable, so to speak. So we can no longer care what's underneath our feet. We just walk heel first, okay? Whereas previously we kind of scouted the area with our toes first. Okay. And so all of that, you know, you can see that all of these things are part of a large tendency, right? Which is like all encompassing or encompassing or whatever. Like, it shows itself, manifests itself throughout all of the culture, all of the society, essentially. And again, the tendency is increase in power, more standardization, more mass production, more power, right? Okay. And same could be said about people, right? When we're talking about like major religions, major morality systems, ultimately the main goal of morality systems, I mean, on societal level, of course, like, to say there is some goal of a morality system would mean that there was somebody who invented this morality system, whereas this is not necessarily the case, I would say. It may spontaneously arise, right? Sort of the purpose, I guess would be a better word, of morality systems is to make people reliable, make people themselves standardized. So this is the important part, where and why do we need to standardize people? Well, to make it possible to construct broader societal networks. So larger collectives of people are able to exist. So large groups of people are able to, like, agree to each other, etc., and interact constructively due to the existence of morality. So if, let's say, I betray you constantly, we cannot trade, so we cannot form these connections. So society is not able to function as good as it could have otherwise if we could have traded, right, reliably. So we need some sort of morality that would say, hey, you should not betray your partners, you know, etc., etc. And same goes for like any sort of morality, like in family, in like whatever. All right, so it all more or less is well, at least like the intention, the subconscious intent probably is to make it possible to increase in power, make the increase in power of society possible through the establishment of longer societal connections. Basically, that's my point. Okay, right. And like moving closer to the end, so returning to my own criticism of this idea, why was I so pissed off about this standardization of people, events, theories, and stuff like that in this game? Well, perhaps, and this is sort of like a meta-analysis of my own person, from my own person, it's like, I don't know, this criticism looks very like elitist, you know? So it's this disgust for trivial things that I sometimes demonstrate. Or maybe you can say it's fear of vulgar things, which is kind of the same thing. It may be the evidence of some like inner fragility of my person, like some inner vulnerability, because it's the desire to escape, right? So there is like a standardized road, like everyone considers this to be this, so this is a standard road, but you tend to, you meaning me, tend to deviate from this road. Like, I don't like this, I don't like where this is going, I would prefer going my own way, so to speak. So this road is too vulgar, so it's somehow I feel like it is dangerous, or I don't know. I mean, I'm just trying to like how do you say it, perform psychoanalysis on top of myself in real time, pretty much. But whatever. Anyways, this approach of mine would actually like, I would say it's a sign of other morality, perhaps, other moral system, that other than the standard one, I mean. So this other morality cherishes the unique, you know, and to a large degree I inherited it from Nietzsche and again, people like that. So it cherishes the unique rather than, you know, the scalable, the standardizable, the unique, the fleeting, the passing, things like that. The masculine, you might say, because, like, again, as I've said in my video, understanding gender, I said that, and I still think that this is the case, that men don't exist, men happen, you know. So yeah, so this sort of, in this sense, masculine. So it's passing. It's not stable. It's not even in some sense. Not ought to live, you know, not ought to persist, I guess. Something like that. Okay. But anyway, this is my approach. But my approach is not viable for all the culture. It cannot really be scaled, right? So in this sense, it's elitist by default, right? But by definition, because again, it strays from culture rather than tries the culture to follow it, or tries to be scaled on all of the culture, right? Whereas the culture itself, this sort of stubborn engine of culture, would still continue to work on these library type of gears, right? So it would, of course, embrace like memes. Again, see my video Music of Memes, where I've analyzed like the phenomenon, which again is very understandable. This is exactly what is easy to transmit through culture, right? Memes, I mean. Which is exactly what we talked about. It's a very simplified, very compressed version of, let's say, an emotion, a situation, a reaction, something like that. Whereas, let's say, a real person standing behind this person in a meme is a completely different thing, right? But this very simplified two-dimensional version of this person, like caught in this act of, I don't know, some mimic or gesturing, it's already a part of culture. It's a fictional character rather than a real person. All right, which is a great illustration for what I've said previously. And I'll probably finish with Coltane's point again. I've already stated it. I think it was in the video of Onion of Aliens, maybe some other. I don't quite remember. But the point was that the true intelligence or the true depth, if we return to the topic of this video, may only be found in individual people, right? In unique people, unique in the sense of, well, any person is unique, and it's not some sort of pathetic like bigotry, I don't know, humanistic bigotry. I mean, it's factually correct, right? So any person is unique and has depth to them, whereas if you like zoom out and observe like a group of people, they already behave almost like a pack of wolves or family of gorillas, so they're already not even that intelligent, right? Whereas if you zoom out even more and observe like a collective of people of, let's say, 100 or more, like say fans on a stadium or something like that, or people at a subway station, they behave like herd of cows or something like that, right? Or sheep. So that's even a lower level of intelligence. Then if you zoom out even more and observe, I don't know, like a city, it looks almost like an insect colony or a beehive or something like that. So it's like even lower in intelligence. And if you observe the humanity as a whole or biosphere as a whole, it almost looks inorganic, you know, it almost looks like a gas. It just tries to, or at least as a, you know, as a mushroom, this thingy. I don't know the proper term in English. Rhizoma, I don't know, rhizoma, whatever. Yeah. What was I meaning to say with this? Yeah, so the idea was behind remembering this passage from Coltane was that if you want to standardize any cultural phenomena, you would have to dumb them down, so to speak, right? To make them accessible for broader collectives. Because, again, the broader you go, the simpler you need to get. And this is just it almost looks like a very fundamental, like almost mathematical, you know, law of society. Like there's nothing deeply philosophical about it. And there's nothing deeply symbolic or metaphysical or mystical about it. It really looks like something very simple and almost mechanical, if you know what I mean. Okay, so to conclude this video, I talked about a problem. Well, maybe not a problem, maybe not a bug, but a feature, if you know what I mean. But a problem of phenomena in culture, not only phenomena, but people, ideas, theories, and things like that, events, being extremely simplified, and only through this simplified and hyperbolized and symbolicized form being recognized by the culture itself. And I call this library world, where the analogy is that, well, a book may be complex, like extremely deep, super existential inside, but in a library you can only observe only a part of its cover, and you have no idea what it of the depths it contains or may contain even, right? So you have to approach it and actually spend time and effort to study it, etc. But until you've done it, it looks very simple and hyperbolized, like, oh, everyone knows Conan Doyle writes detective stories or something like that. Yeah, you have an idea like that, but you have no idea that Conan Doyle was also into mysticism and spiritualism and things like that, etc., etc. And it's even what I'm saying right now is very trivial and sort of dumbed down type of knowledge about this person that you can acquire, like in any sort of biographical, like a paragraph about him. Okay, so this is the problem, that the culture tends to grind things down really heavily into the absolute bare minimum, and then churn out this simplified version everywhere. But what's good about it is that it allows it to actually spread the information very, very far. So it allows us to form very long networks and thus project our power elsewhere, right? Everywhere. So this is how culture works, seemingly. And it's connected to the general process of standardization, which was a characteristic, or, well, not only was, but still is, of the industrial and post-industrial civilization that we're living in, right? Where mass production, standardization were the main things, so to speak. Name of the game. So this is simultaneously a big tragedy for an individual that we are not remembered by culture as we are, but rather as some fictional character made of us, right? Some concentrated syrup of us, which is somewhat arbitrarily crafted, I should add. But at the same time, for a culture, it's well, I wouldn't say comedy, but it's a good thing, right? So it's a tragedy of an individual, but a comedy for culture, I guess, something like that. Okay, so that's what I mean by library world. So as you can see, there are both good and bad things about it, I guess. It depends on the point of view. All right, thank you for watching. The eons are closing.